Ingesting architectures on atmospheric violences. A turba, soil, ground, earth, dust. Date 18th March 2020. Material composition: nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, argon, dust particles, SARS-CoV-2. Speed 11,000 liters a day, 12 to 25 times every 60 seconds, through the trachea, lungs, blood. It took 77 days to reach a reported 204,200 cases, an estimated 5.5 million unreported from the time it was found in one, without ever being aware of your individual existence across 11,000 kilometers of earth and ocean, with every conscious and unconscious raspy draw of atmosphere, with each slight touch of every invisible drop on every architectural surface, I ingest all of humanity collectively. So much so that the only way to tear you from my veins, to stop you from coursing through my every cell, and then exhaling a piece of you back for the world to love, is to so forcefully isolate. Date: the year 1760 to 1884. Material composition: large amounts of toxic sulfurized gases such as SO2, H2S, and CS2. In February 1884, John Ruskin ascended the lectern at the London Institution and brought to his audience's attention a series of cloud phenomena peculiar to our own times, which have not hitherto received any notice from meteorologists. Ruskin termed this series of cloud phenomena the storm cloud of the 19th century, a plague wind darkening the skies across British Isles and indeed all of Europe. Ruskin detailed the descriptions of the clouds, coupled with his own observations, sketches, and paintings of clouds and sunsets, in order to build the case for the existence of the plague wind of the 8th decade in the 19th century, a period which will be recognized in future meteorological history as one phenomena previously unrecorded in the courses of nature. Ruskin was, of course, talking about anthropogenic climate change, a novel, well-nigh unthinkable phenomenon produced by the age of industry, but approachable only in the language of myth. Ruskin started to suggest that the atmosphere, dust and clouds are evidence and archive of history, class struggle, practices of labor and exploitation, and the interconnectedness of these factors. He understood the weather as inhumane. There is a violence in breathing in parts of Joburg. There is a violence in breathing in parts of Joburg. Date: 2 billion years ago. Material composition: gold, Au, found in quartzite and pyrite ore, specific gravity of 19.3. Speed: Vredefort crater impact, about 20 kilometers per second immediate impact, about a billion years of geological shift. A meteor strike to the Earth's crust drove gold to the Earth's surface in Joburg. In 1886, gold is discovered. A connection to deep time is brought to the surface.
We Europeans who've lived in this country for more than 300 years have come to a conclusion which is strange to some people in the Western world, namely that the peoples of Africa, and so the Bantu people of South Africa, have a beautiful civilization of their own, which is worth preserving.
Black labor forces are brought from all over the country to mine the land. Deaths on the mines through silicosis, tuberculosis, and other forms of lung disease are common. Date: 1923. Material composition: uranium, mercury, radon, arsenic, and sulfuric acid. Speed: dolomitic blasts at 25.4 millimeters per second. The Natives Land Act legislated on a broad front to regulate the presence of Africans in urban areas. It gave the local authorities power to demarcate and establish African locations on the outskirts of white urban and industrial areas, and to determine access to and the funding of these areas. This sedimented in legislation and planning that blacks would live next to toxic areas, mine dumps, and industrial buffer zones in Joburg. On windy days, some townships are covered in yellow dust. Asthmatic complications and tuberculosis rise. Buffer zones for whites, Wazoos, parks, and trees. Date 2020 to 2018. Material composition: compound silicon dioxide or silica. Speed: from weeks to months from constant close exposure, or 5 to 10 years after slower exposure. On the 21st of December 2012, attorney Richard Spoor filed a motion in South African court seeking class action certification for as many as 17,000 ex-gold miners suffering from the lung disease silicosis. On the 3rd of May 2018, the parties announced that they had reached an agreement. Date 2002. Material composition: forensic studies show dust particles made up of soil, skin, flesh, glass, cocaine, brick, concrete, cyanide. Speed: 1,800 meters per second. In a recent lecture, A.L. Wiseman described an anecdote of one of his colleagues in Palestine. His neighborhood was turning into dust. He was coughing and he was saying, "I am breathing my house." He was literally breathing in his house, his street, his ground, his family. Clouds include everything pulverized by a bomb that a building once was. Date: October 2010. Material composition: hydroxyapatite stained blue by nickel and pyrites. Speed: erosion over 124 years at a rate of plus minus 7,500 kilograms per year. There is an extreme violence in breathing in parts of Joburg. There is an extreme violence in breathing in parts of Joburg. In October 2010, security guards at Langlaagte mine dump noticed human bones sticking out of the ground of one of the mine dumps on site. 650 unmarked graves were discovered. Most of the remains found were believed to be those of adult African males. At least 2 sets of remains found were possibly of Asian Chinese origin. Thousands of Chinese mine workers were brought to work in South African mines after the Anglo-Boer War. Many died and were buried on the mines at the time. Chinese porcelain plates and cups from the late 19th century were also found. It was difficult to determine from the remains, but historical info tells of meningitis, pneumonia, tuberculosis, influenza, and mining-related accidents. Questions have emerged as to why this cemetery, which was one of the largest in Johannesburg between 1890 and 1920, was completely undocumented. It seems as if the cemetery was long forgotten after its use and was covered by a mine dump later. The erosion of the mine dump is bringing history to the surface. Date 2019. Material composition: Na2O 0.18%, MgO 0.63%, Ai2O3 6.51%, SiO2 81.83%, P2O5 0.04%, SO3 3.4%, K2O 1.98%, CaO 0.45%, TiO2 0.51%, Cr2O3 0.17%, MnO 0.04%, Fe2O3 3.59%. Speed: an accelerated geology of 1,000,000 years. The leftovers of the start of the city, a completely expansive set of tunnels, arguably taking up more volume than the city itself, is largely forgotten and has eroded out of sight, shrouded by edifices, highways, and high-felled grasses. They have found new inhabitants, a group who is, at the very least, among the most vulnerable in the city, a reminder that the gold that built the city still allures desperation. The mountains of incandescent mine waste are monumental in areas along the gold reef, mass-scale architectures when seen from the air in relation to the built form of the city. But a zoom-in of the dust mountains reveals new networks of activities. Though these are man-made mountains, they have become entangled in natural processes. The highly toxic chemical saps seeping from below often surface as iron red and cobalt blue rivers. Grasses and foliage, some planted during the mining age to contain the dust, others planted more recently in attempts to remediate soils, are sprawling and uninhibited. The mine dump's most unearthly luminescent yellow structure is interrupted by smaller topographies of crevices and walls, slowly printed into a geology by an accelerated setting of the blasted rock, with the poisonous byproducts of the explosives. The invisible code for composing this landscape came from abrasive industrial processes decades ago, and their implications are still producing this landscape. Clues in the landscape are often testimony of toxic activity, even when the site is disguised or reconfigured from its prior use as a waste dump or an old mine. Being on a mine dump often feels like being in a scene from a sci-fi film. Perhaps it is this otherworldliness and seclusion from the city that attracts ritual activity. The Masowe churches often use the mine dumps as sites of ritual sermon and ceremonial prayer, an exercise in placemaking. The process of preparing the space for ritual prayer. 1. Chase former evil dwellers. 2. Remove dirt. 3. Dig a hole, place salt in it. 4. Add a sheep's tail to the hole if available. Sheep's tails act as amulets against witchcraft. Cover the hole with soil. Draw a circle of hot ashes within the limit of the cleared space. Have 3 priests gather around it with a bucket of water in the middle. Mix coarse salt in the water. Pray over the water, sprinkling it around. At several speeds, the mine dumps are holding and carrying remnants of current clandestine, religious, economic, and recreational practices, illegal mining, ritual slaughter, informal trade, housing, sandboarding, church gatherings.
The Golden City, South Africa's Johannesburg. 70 years have brought a small township to rank with the world's richest cities, and it's still growing fast. A center of gold mining, of industry and commerce, Johannesburg creates enormous wealth. More than 1 person in 3 has a car, a fact reflected in the city's design.
At other speeds, they are eroding and revealing histories and historical artifacts. Bones of enslaved bodies, porcelain plates, the original glass from Joburg Buildings and the Joburg Water Company. As we breathe in Joburg, we are literally ingesting past legacies, histories, and environments. We are breathing in the remains of exploitation of the earth and our ancestors. At-Turba, soil, ground, earth, dust, land. Kullukum li Adam, wa Adam min turab. Everyone is from Adam, and Adam is from dust. Is there anything more violent than separating bodies from the earth they belong to, that became so physiologically a part of them through centuries of breath, of exploiting and contaminating this ground and those who work it, and then allowing it to be breathed in again in its dust form?